One, two, three, four, five.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Here.
Mr. G,
Here.
Mr. Posnell,
Here.
Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sanders,
Here.
Mrs. Schrader, Mr. Sears,
Here.
Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Toman. 8 members present.
Thank you. Reminder to please silence your cell phones during the meeting. And this will be the first opportunity for public comment. All comments and questions will be addressed to the president. Board and staff members will not normally respond to comments or questions during the meeting unless recognized by the president for this purpose. Comments will be limited at the discretion of the president to 5 minutes or less. Okay.
Good evening, school board member. My name is Pino Desai. I reside at 740 Willowbrook Way. I wanted to address the concerns we've had that I brought up last school board meeting, and we're worse off than we were last winter. So wondering why our health and safety plan is less protective than before. Newest studies coming in for the Omicron variant is at the very least just as severe as Delta and even more transmissible. The current health and safety plan is contributing to the spread of this virus and the mutation. For example, the contact tracing section, it just states that we may be possibly exposed. No details are provided, and it's concerning because it requires further disruption for our children who have to be taken out. For example, parents who are being cautious, following best practices to quarantine when we get a notice. Now we get a letter, which is most likely automated, that states that you're approaching the 10-day limit. Our daughter had 2 notice within 2 weeks. So I would please like to request that the school board members follow guidelines that are provided from facts from medical and scientific professionals. One example is the death rate should not be the only considered statistics. We personally know a young child who caught COVID recently and has long haul COVID. The symptoms which sets our youth up for lifelong chronic illness if they're not protected. I like to raise these concerns. I did raise these concerns last meeting, and I thought that you guys would have the opportunity to be proactive. Unfortunately, nothing was done, and I don't even see it on the agenda today. It's very disheartening. Therefore, I urge that you make a motion tonight to amend the current health and safety plan with all of the above consideration, please. Thank you.
Okay. Angel Hepner. I live on Hill Street, right down the road here. I'm sorry,
Thank
I'm
you.
short. I'm not sorry, I'm short, but. Okay. Same thing. I understand the masks are not on the agenda tonight.
Could you say your name and address one more time,
Oh
please?
yeah, Angel Hepner, 1028 Hill Street.
Thank you.
I understand that masks are not scheduled for tonight, and I get that. We have them set up for a future one. Problem is, it is a now issue. I know they took away the mandate. I know that we said we're going to revert to our previous policy. The thing with that policy is it's not fluid enough to really fluctuate with COVID the way it goes up and down. Okay, I work at the hospital. It is in our community, and it is on track to beat what we had last year at our highest point after Christmas, and we're not at Christmas yet. I would love the amendment we tried to pass last time. It made sense. The one where it said it goes to the current policy, for lower transmission rates, and the one where we go with universal masks at a higher substantial in the community. That would be fair for now to be safe while we gather more info for you to talk about it in the future. I think it would be irresponsible of us to not address this issue in the now, since now is when the numbers are exploding. It doesn't require 95. It doesn't have to be rash. Doesn't have to be forever. Doesn't have to take up all of your time. But it would be great if we could give this to our kids. Mine has been home since we went with optional masks, and he will be that way until we fix it or until the numbers start coming down. He's vaccinated and he's healthy, but we don't know about this long term and what chronic things that this could do for our kids for their lifetime. They're quite young. I don't want to expose him to this if I can help it. He needs to be in the building. He's succeeding so much better this year. Being home for him was not good for him. I need him to be in the building, to be healthy, to be educated, and to be safe. I appreciate all of you that were trying to get masks for when we need them most. I hope we can be more successful tonight and that we could have a small space where we discuss that. I don't know if you know what the hospital looks like. I'm not going to give you a long spiel about it, but it's pretty crazy. Those articles I've read that say we're using creative placement and untraditional patient places. We have set up a waiting area in the main lobby of York Hospital where people sit in wheelchairs with IVs, masks, COVID test pending, nauseous in the lobby because we're out of room. We have 20 stretchers in the old waiting room. We are admitting patients from the ED when they finally get a bed to a hospital bed sometimes in the hallway with just a screen around it and like a dinner bell where you ding so somebody knows you want them. No TV, no call bell, no suction if we have an emergency. We're doing our best to keep everybody safe. But if the numbers are this high in our community, we need to protect our kids. I know if we go out, it looks like it's normal stuff. Everybody goes to the store, no mask, doing the regular thing. We're feeling it. You know, we need to keep the kids safe and in school. I think masks are very effective and would help us with that. So I hope that you guys will at least consider discussing it again tonight and let Trace stay in school. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Hi, Ashley Turner, 433 West Williamsburg Avenue. And I just wanted to give everyone an idea of the emails that we've been getting when our children are exposed. My daughter is a 5th grader at Indian Rock, and we've gotten no less than 12 notifications this year. I'm getting a little tired of the Who Has COVID game because that's what we have to do. I have no idea how close she was to the person, just that she was in a room with them or on a bus. And how close she was to them kind of determines what actions I want to take. So we go through the motions. Today, she was exposed to someone last Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So my question was, who was at school on those days and wasn't there today? Narrowed it down, we know who it is. The kids do this on their own. They don't need their parents to prompt them. One day, a substitute called a student's name who wasn't there. All of the kids shouted, "He has COVID." So they know. They're able to figure it out. And part of the precautionary measures that were sent in these emails include encouraging our children to wear a mask in all settings for the next 14 days. At this rate, they would be masked every day because we are getting a notification at least once every 2 weeks. It's too much. If the contact tracing were a little bit better, maybe I'd feel a little bit more comfortable, but I don't. My child is vaccinated. I am vaccinated. But I had COVID, and I never want to go through that again. I went through the repercussions of that for months. Long COVID is real. Hopefully my children didn't have it. A year ago, they wouldn't test them because they didn't have symptoms by the time I tested positive. So we don't know. But I don't want anyone to experience that. So I think we have 2 things to consider here. Not just whether or not we're going to continue masking, but can we please do better at contact tracing? Last year, I got 1 notification the whole year. Granted, we were in hybrid and my daughter was in school, but only 1 notification last year. And we're not even halfway through, and I've gotten at least a dozen. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. You have a link here to the minutes of the Nominations Committee meeting of December 6, 2021. Unless there are changes, I think we can have that approved as submitted. We also have the minutes of the Reorganization and Planning Committee meeting of December 6, 2021. The same thing, unless somebody has any changes, they can be approved as submitted. Mr. Sears, Treasurer's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Posnow. Let me just start with some figures from the general fund and the other fund. The ending balance at the end of November $24,887,045. That's down from down from 26,814,157. Normal expenditure. Interest income of 5,969. In the other funds, the ending balance 31,489,430, up from 30,699. That includes $2.4 million in the PNC school tax lockbox account. And interest income in these other funds is $2,400 in the past month. As usual, we have a consent agenda. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there questions or comments about any of the items? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you. The board met in executive session tonight, December 20th, 2021 at 6:30 p.m. as permitted by Section 707 of the Sunshine Act for the purpose of discussing personnel. No official action was taken. Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Posno. Before we get to FFP tonight, I did want to make a brief statement about Friday and the perceived threat that we had. I talked to several parents over the course of the events, and there's a couple of things that I need to share with you so that we have a better understanding of how we handle these kinds of situations. We've seen a national trend of anonymous school threats posted on social media. America has also seen some specific threats, the most notable of which came out of Michigan. I mention this because people have told us they see similarities between Michigan's situation and the one we experienced at the high school last week. While there were indeed some similarities, the situations were very different. When notified of a perceived threat, we very carefully investigate whether or not the perceived threat is credible. At the same time, we engage in law enforcement to conduct a parallel investigation. These investigations are conducted independently of each other, and afterward, York Suburban and the law enforcement agency compare results. When the results coincide, we know how to proceed. If they do not, then we would need to consider the threat credible until such time as it is mitigated. In our case, Thursday afternoon, both the school district and the Spring Garden Township Police Department determined that no threat existed in the high school and that the situation was markedly different than the one in Michigan. Therefore, we notified parents that school would be open on Friday. We've had requests to know more about the specifics of the perceived threat, and we wish we could share more. Due to student privacy concerns, however, we are not at liberty to share additional information other than to say that there was no risk of harm. I'd like to thank the Spring Garden Police Department for its very quick response in this matter. They were most helpful and responded immediately when we called, which is one of the reasons we continue to have a good relationship with both police departments so that when we need them, they're there for us. So it worked out well for us. So I wanted to share that with you. And now we'll move on to, unless you have any questions, board members, we'll move on to FFP presentation and then recommendation for FFP with Dr. Krauser.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Well, it's nice to be back again during this journey that we've been visiting each and every meeting to lay context, foundation, and processes along the way over the last 6-7 months, which actually began all the way back in 2016. Our goal for this evening is to kind of summarize this process that's been occurring over time and provide context and context to inevitably pass this to the very conclusion over to Dr. Williams to provide an administrative recommendation through our process to date. So a little bit about this evening and our goals. As I mentioned, we're going to provide an overview, a general review of how this has worked from the beginning. I'll be tag teaming a little bit with my partner, Mr. Seth Wentz, for that as well. Inevitably to gear us up towards that committee recommendation. Also going to share with you our communications plan. That's going to lay the foundation of the goals that we started when this process began and what that communication plan will be looking forward, how it will be looking forward in the course of the next month. From there, Mrs. Chicholi and her team are going to share about our financial investments. And then lastly, as I shared, pass it off to Dr. Williams to kind of solidify that communication with an administrative recommendation. So an image that we've seen time and time again, it is this process that began very parallel as we started the work, as the Future Focus Committee began, driven by the directive from the board, all the way to the teaming that came together for our last 2 to 3 months here, moving through the process to inevitably join us this evening where we talk about our final recommendation and next steps. To kind of repaint that framework again, we began with a recommendation with this primary goal of the committee to develop options for optimal academic opportunities for our York suburban student population based on our goals in a financially sustainable framework. That guiding directive has been our premise and our foundations as we move forward. In the same breath, we haven't lost sight of what our foundation has looked like regarding the vision that we have as the York Suburban School District, the strategic principles that the board voted on early in the process that have led our way through both the educational programming as well as the study options and inevitably the financial stability investments that Mrs. Chicholi and her team has worked on. And we've done that with our boots on ground, working with our mission for inspiring a bold future. So what I'd like to do is call Mr. Wentz back up. We're going to do a quick kind of recap about the why. How did we end up in this position with our directive in this sense? So, Seth.
Thank you, Dr. Krauser. This is an image that you've seen several times now, and I bring it up just to put context to the conversation. This is kind of mapping out major projects that happen throughout the district, the date that they happened, and what it points out, as I've mentioned before, is this banding of projects that you go approximately 20 years, and then there's 10 years of major work on buildings. This isn't something that you guys created. This isn't something that the board created. This is a normal series, a normal sequence of projects and major renovations that a district sees. Now, it's not often that you see it this graphically, but it was actually Dr. Williams that asked this question and brought this to light. What this really demonstrates is the fact that there is going to be an investment in the facilities regardless of what you do. You're at the precipice of that. You're at that launching point. So the next 10 years, there is going to be work to be done regardless of what decisions are made by the board. But a decision does have to be made as to what opportunities you're going to take advantage of as you move through this process. We thought it would be a good idea to kind of pause, take a step back from all the, you can do this with this building, something else over there, and really talk about what is the point of a study. And I know this came up in public comment at one point, and I know the board has wanted to talk specifics about certain things. And I wanted to kind of recap what a study is, what a project is, and what we're aiming for at the end of all of this. A study is really a development of big picture concepts. In that, you develop the educational vision, you identify facility needs, you develop options for consideration, and you realize financial impacts and plan for the future. And what I mean by plan for the future, it's, with our friends from PFM, making a roadmap as to how you achieve those goals financially. But ultimately, in orange, it's to determine a direction that best addresses the district needs. It's not to say we know everything on the project. It's to say, yeah, we have the roadmap. We know how to get to the destination. We have a plan. A project, that's very different. A project is a specific building. So specific to a building or site. That's where design decisions are made. That's when we really dig into, this is what the building looks like. This is how the building is laid out, and we know that's the direction we're going. You do revisit the educational program again. There's public comment that's brought into play, and it results in a project of a renovation or addition or whatever as required for that specific project. So everything gets revisited again. The decision that a board has to make at the end of a study and the decisions that are made during projects, the board still weighs in every step of the way. The public is still engaged every step of the way. And then the idea is the ideal results is the comprehensive projects that address district needs for the next 20 plus years. And that's the goal, to go through this process and say, we have the roadmap, We know the stops along the way, those are the projects, and that's going to get us to that place we want to be, where we're not worried about interruption of service, enrollment issues, or educational program that's not being met.
So as Seth shared, that image and that process, as we've kind of recycled repeatedly about this filtering or sifting down, comes back to this primary goal of what our committee work was designed to do, to deliver those options that best fit the needs and where that study moves forward in this process. So what I'd like to share now is, again, another image from this point. And here comes the context in preparation for our administrative recommendation this evening. As we've sifted through these project study overviews, we've been vetting it down based on the programming, the enrollment, and the financial means in which our investments best realize our best efficiency. So I want to bring our attention back to one in particular, and that's option 4B. I'm going to have Seth just kind of recap very briefly what that recommendation looks like in the red areas and the campuses and how that breakdown will look.
So this is the option where there's a consolidation of the buildings. Right now we have two separate K2s, we have two separate 3 through 5s, and then the middle school as the 6 through 8 and high school separate. What this does is it groups them together into single buildings for those grade groupings. So East York is proposed as the most efficient building to convert into a single K2. So that's I'll use the pointer here. That's the building in the upper left-hand corner. And the red area, the solid red area, is a 2-story addition proposed to that building. The site issues in this proposed option have been resolved to the best of the site's ability by separating parent and bus drop-off, and still leaving ample space with that addition for plenty of playground and after-school sports supporting that educational program. So that would be the proposed K2 location as determined by the most efficient use of funds and buildings. Likewise, the middle school, existing middle school, would also receive an addition, and that could be converted into a 3-6 scenario. Again, some of the site would be taken up to separate the bus and parent drop-offs. And in the proposal, in the study, there's a possibility of moving the entry of the building to the parent drop-off side and realizing better circulation and connection to the addition that would become the student drop-off with the buses in the back. For the secondary campus, 7 through 12 exists, and the high school and Valley View are proposed as being realized for that campus. What we would do is have, as Dr. Krauser mentioned in the past, high school remains as the high school, Valley View gets converted into a 7-8 building, and common functions happen in what is the red addition right there, which are cafeteria, media center, arts, those kind of shared functions. And it really provides 2 schools that exist within one campus that are connected by common functions. And then Indian Rock at well, I jumped over Yorkshire, I apologize. Yorkshire can remain as is without major additions, minor renovations to the inside, and could be converted into a district administration office, early learning center, and technology center. And then Indian Rock is an available asset for district use in the future. I was asked, the phasing plan that we shared last time, it wasn't the most graphically appealing. It's the one that comes out of Excel and is the easiest to present, but it didn't really share the story of how this happens. So I think it was either Dr. Krauser or Dr. Ketterman mentioned, is there a better way of displaying that information? So we redid the phasing schedule here, and this schedule is based on board direction in January 2022. So it would start with the design. In each one of these sections, we have it broken down by year. It's a 6-step process over 5 years, and we have it broken down into design and construction for each phase. So it would start with the design of East York. That design would take about a year to happen, to complete and coordinate and get permit approval, and then the bidding process would happen immediately after that, and construction would start in 2023. East York is the one that has the addition on the 2-story addition on the back of the building. That would be constructed first. Without interfering with the education program happening inside the existing building, students could move over into the new classrooms once that's completed, and renovations can happen to the rest of that building, increasing capacity for the district allowing for more swing space for other options. So design in 2022, construction in 2023. So you see the East York additions and renovations happening there. Design of the middle school would happen at 2023 while that construction effort is starting. And then in 2024, design would be on the secondary campus, starting that process, while construction wraps up on East York. So the East York completion would be summer of 2024. The middle school would actually start its renovations in 2024, and swing space that would be available, Yorkshire and Indian Rock at that point, when the middle school has its full completion and is usable. 2025, the secondary campus would finish up its design, and Yorkshire would start its design as office renovation for the district office and any modifications needed for the early learning center there. Construction in 2025 would include the continued renovations to the middle school, which would be completed in August of 2025. Construction for phase 1 of the high school would also start in 2025. That phase 1 is the addition, so the new construction part, and renovations to Valley View to convert it into a middle school facility. In 2026, the construction would continue on Yorkshire. The construction would start, on Yorkshire. That's expected to be a summer project. And the secondary phase 2 would be able to begin. Phase 2 would be the actual renovations to the existing high school. The high school students could move over into the new construction that was built and Valley View and use those facilities, so just shifting from one side of the building to the other, while the interior renovations happen to the high school. Still, Indian Rock is available as swing space at that time to handle other student capacities. And then in 2027, no design work is happening at that time, but Yorkshire is finished up, and that's completed in the summer of, July 27. And then the renovations of phase 2 for the secondary campus are also completed in July 27. Again, this is all predicated on direction in January 22, saying that yes, we want to start that sequence. Questions on the phasing?
So at our last meeting, we did a transition. We began to talk about using school investments, having these schools be our investments. And inevitably that question always comes up, what's the return on the investment? Making a decision like this, and I mentioned last time, it's inexpensive. We knew it from the very beginning to address our aging facilities, the programs, enrollments was going to be a substantial investment. And at the heart of everything we do, we're guided by our student achievement and growth. That's our primary function, our primary goal. And when we ask, will this recommendation guarantee an increase in student achievement? Well, that's a difficult question to ask when we talk about guarantees. It would be not appropriate for us to say, we can guarantee this will happen. But what we can say is we can, as educators, rely back on what the research tells us. So the center of this graphic is our student growth and achievement. That's our primary function. That is our vision, and that has been the vision of the district as its entire time forward. That is our goal, to provide students, as the directive said, with the greatest optimal academic opportunities. What we know that we can guarantee with this option are the 4 surrounding rings. And the research tells us there's a clear distinction that those 4 rings lead to guaranteed student growth and achievement. And the first is that every student has access to the resources and rigor that they need at the right moment in their education. We shared from a variety of the presentations, being able to gain efficiencies and provide equity across the scale provides greater opportunity for students to give what they need at the right moment in their education. The second one is the flexibility that comes. Our ability to group our learners and the adults who serve them improves the delivery of our instruction. That in turn leads to increased student growth and achievement. Student engagement has been clearly linked to increased student growth and achievement. And how do we increase student engagement? We ensure we have modern, intentionally designed spaces. We're having spaces that reflect what the modern career, academic, and workforce spaces look like, and how that links directly to space, technology, and resources. And lastly, we know clearly how collaboration, both between adults and inter-student collaboration, increases student growth and achievement. So by connecting the pedagogy, the technology, and the space, we can increase the collaboration in among the students, as well as professionally support the collaboration of our teaching staff and our professional staff, the spaces in which they collaborate and the spaces in which they work and design the lessons that will influence our students as they move forward. So when we talk about investment and we share with you our return, this is the return on investment. Our primary goal, as always, is to provide pathways for our students to meet the highest optimal success in both academics and in their growth at an individual level. And to guarantee that, this option will provide a guarantee on the outer rings, which research reminds us influences that inner ring. So that's our hope with this option, to guarantee that investment that you seek with a substantial change in the realignment and the organization of the district. Now, what I'd like to share a little bit now is our communication plan. A little bit about the process that's been done to date, and the goals that we established in the beginning, and inevitably the goals that will carry us through the months of January. So in the very beginning, actually, with Mr. Staub and I, as always, we laid a foundation with a focus on our mission and vision to keep us grounded in that process. We then established some clear goals of what we wanted in the communication regarding the FFP. Number one, we wanted to ensure we were informing the residents of York Suburban about the FFP, the future focused planning process, and we were going to use a variety of communication methods to achieve that goal. Second, we wanted to create opportunities for our community and our citizens and our stakeholders to have a voice and be involved in this process. So if we kind of turn back to last year when the directive came out, a little trip down memory lane of all the things that we've been doing to achieve those goals. Well, it began first, as Mr. Posnow and the board provided us with the directive, we immediately created a steering committee, which consisted of teachers and students, community members, administrators, and additional non-community members from the career force. We had a variety of meetings to gather information, set course and direction on the information that we should gather to better align our planned program. We also formed our FFP website as that kind of landing space of communication, details, and information. Then began our survey and data collection. We distributed surveys, we organized focus groups, we engaged into visual listening exercises. Again, part of that study process as we engage in the process. We've conducted, this being number 12 public presentations during meetings of the whole board, all of those being recorded, all of those being shared with the community. We've shared out 6 video updates with the community, engaging in the work that we've done in the data collection that will involve things like our white papers, our infographics, and of course, those 26 guiding principles that the committee had set forth on our process. We've also written communication that we've posted on our website. We put ads in the York Spring-Sperry Township newsletter. We've posted 6 newspaper article ads in the York Dispatch and the York Daily Record. We've posted in the Spring Garden Township newsletter as well. Now we're kind of catching up to this process moving in through January, late December. So our additional plans moving forward is to continue to provide our YSSD students these updates via email. We've prepared a mass postcard mailing to every resident in the York Suburban School District to provide them information about our upcoming January 12th meeting, how to access our information on our website, and gain any information that they would need to be better informed about the process. Hopefully you've seen some of our yard signs. We've posted yard signs at every school district building for people to view and access and gain information, and then of course invite them to our future focus planning town meeting on the 12th. In addition, we're going to be adding signs to the doors of each building. We use a QR code. If you're familiar with a QR code, it's an easy scanning with your phone, which again links those families back to our information site on our website. We'll continue to add newspaper advertisements, and then again host our January 12th meeting and use social media as its positive influence that social media always is. So kind of a breakdown of that timeline in sequential order. Yard signs are coming out. You've seen them. Hopefully, they're continuing throughout this time until the end of January. We're going to post our social media. We're going to use the signs in the buildings, and we're going to send those updates. And again, I'll stress that positive influence of social media as it uses a communication tool in such a positive, influential way. Then we're going to move into tonight. Of course, our goal is to provide a recommendation. And then kind of moving forward, we have timed it quite well, and Mr. Staub has done a great job of working with our local mailers to ensure that our postcards are making it to the homes no later than that first week of January. They're actually in the process of getting squared away very shortly in that Christmas time. Then we'll run those additional ads in our local newspapers. And then you can see a variety of things that we're doing through the month of January to prepare ourselves for that big host community event on January 12th, as well as additional ads in our local newspapers to move us up to the end of the month in hopes of board action. As Mr. Wentz had shared, all of our work to date is based on action in January. If the board moves in that direction, that alignment and phasing process will continue to stay in line. So that's our timeline and our process through the communication end. Any questions specific to that role and what we're doing to engage both our YSSD parents, but as well as our stakeholders that are community residents and taxpayers? Yes.
If I'm reading this, then you're having just one community meeting, is that correct?
Well, the public school meetings, we would also consider a community meeting, but the January 12th meeting is a special purpose meeting specifically designed for any resident and
Well,
or
I'm thinking
community.
in terms of, when you make presentations, we don't allow people to ask questions and get answers at the board meeting. So there's only one meeting where there'll be an actual discussion.
Correct, to the January 12th meeting,
Have
yes.
you considered anything that's an evening meeting during the day or other times for people that are not available at the time? That's, 6 to 9 o'clock timeframe, I believe, on the 12th.
Correct. That's a great question. We have prepared for that alternative. We are going to be recording a pre-session of what the overview of the presentation would look like, and then have an electronic submission so those questions can be addressed ahead of time. So we're going to have an avenue that an overview of that presentation will be pre-recorded, that you'll be able to see that on our website prior to the January 12th meeting, and that questions can be submitted before that. We're also going to stream that interactive, and we're working on a way that questions can be submitted in a streaming sense, similar to what we would do with a Mentimeter or some other formative tool that people can provide feedback. Yes. So you won't have to actually be present and on site to engage in that meeting. It's a great question.
Dr. Krauser, I think I would follow Ellen's lead on that and argue that I'm not sure one opportunity for people to speak face-to-face and discuss is enough. We may want to consider more opportunities.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just sort of echo that. I think this is a really tight timeline. I mean, even just for me personally, even though we've sort of talked about this, I don't know, seems like forever, getting right down to the nitty gritty, having the board act on it, it just seems like a really quick timeline. I'd be more interested in hearing, from families, and because this is a big shift from what the proposal is, a big shift from what York suburban families are accustomed to, and I have some reservations about the timeline. I'll leave it at that.
So may I ask a clarifying question? Is the will of the board then to extend the timeline or extend more opportunities for that involvement?
Well, let me start, and I'll let the board jump me if I'm going down the wrong path.
Sure.
One is, I think we do need more community input, but my concern with the timeline is we're getting ready to go into a search for a new superintendent. And if I were applying for a superintendent's job and the board said, we've made this decision, we're going this way, and I might think that's completely wrong or not. Somehow in this planning process, I think we have to leave space to fix everything we can fix that needs to be fixed and allow for that search process to happen. So I'm not sure you would get the board, and this way you guys can jump on me, but I'm not sure you would get the board to agree by January 20th to go down one path versus another.
Okay.
That's just kind of my thought.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am too, in terms of district leadership. with the big change, down the road in a few months, that I just, if we had a new superintendent coming in who's adamantly opposed to, a decision we've made, or I don't know, arguably worse, if they sort of say, well, I couldn't possibly go there because I'm adamantly opposed to, I'll just throw out a secondary campus, which frankly, I've mentioned this before, I have some concerns about. I would really like to see some research supporting the idea of a secondary campus. I know just a couple of anecdotal things have been mentioned, but that's an area of concern, a significant concern of mine. I think families are going to have some issues with that as well. We're going to start the concept of we're losing some of that personal contact that middle school, junior high kids really need. And I think whether it would be reality or not, the concern is going to be they're going to get lost in the shuffle, moving them up there to the high school. I'm not saying that's necessarily what I think, but I just need to be persuaded a bit.
Dr. Krauser, I'm going to go a little bit different direction than the other board members. It is my understanding that since this process has began, the public has had the opportunity for public comment either in writing or to show up to the meetings and pose questions in a public comment setting. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions?
I think you'd find from the public, though, Mr. G, that it's been largely listen and see what the plans are going to be. And there's been, I can't off the top of my head think of a single, question that we've had really pertaining to this big, change that we're looking at. And I think from the public's perspective, it has perhaps been, well, let's hear what the plan is. And then when there's a town hall, then we'll have all the information and we can, really address it there. I don't want to leave the impression with anybody that I'm resistant to change. That's not at all the root of my concern. My concern is the timeline and getting feedback from the community, because it is such a big change. We're talking about potentially 1,000 elementary kids in one building, and a lot of people moved to this district because we've had these smaller community schools. Again, I'm not passing judgment one way or the other, saying, that's good or bad. I'm just trying to anticipate family concerns. And I don't think, even though they have, yes, had opportunity, I don't know that people have really felt, I'll use the word welcomed, to come in and really express those concerns, because it's been an ongoing, we're still studying, we're still, coming out and identifying plans. And it's only, now that we're going to say, okay, this is what administration is suggesting. So.
I do appreciate that comment. Obviously,
microphone. Sorry.
I do appreciate that comment. Obviously, I am new into this process, coming in at a late stage at the very end and having to make the same decisions as the rest of the board.
Right. No, I get it. And, we've all been in that chair, so no worries.
I'd just like to follow up what Mr. Posnow said, because I believe we have a lot of things on our plate this spring, not only the search for new leadership, but we have a teacher's contract. Our head of facilities is leaving, a very long-standing person, which may be harder to find a successor for him than we realized. So I think that we need to allow for sufficient time for the public to comment and for the board to also be available for all these meetings, and knowing what it takes for the superintendent search and a lot of these things. It's meeting after meeting after meeting. So I think we need to be very judicious about how we approach this. And I too think that we need to give the public as many and sufficient time to come in and comment on these plans now that they're finally here. The administration wasn't at times anxious to have people coming in during this process, although the meetings were open and they were available. We welcome whatever comments they wanted to make each one of these meetings when Mr. Wentz spoke or PFM or something like that. But I think we have to be very careful about our timing in the next 3 or 4 months as a board.
Sure, sure. And through that process, a big part of that timing for us was, as always, to ensure that we're not having a disruption in service. So I think that, again, comes with the two-part process to the charge that we were tasked with, and how we can come up with a recommendation that fit the original charge, but also in the same breath to ensure the facilities are operational. Okay, so we'll readjust that timeline and reapply some of those strategies. Mr. Todd. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Chicholi, kind of with that caveat that this was set on, I believe, this current timeline, but I think she can address some of those components as well. So she's going to share the next slide, which is the intro slide right there with the.
I have one slide before that. Sorry.
There you go.
So Dr. Krauser mentioned that, of course, this was going to take a financial investment to achieve. And so we did a 10-year analysis on what that financial investment would be. And here you have 4 columns before you. And I'm going to start with, I think I turned it off. Oh, okay. So this green bar is the repair of HVAC, electrical, and plumbing only. So it doesn't take into consideration growing enrollment. It doesn't take into consideration classrooms or educational programs. It just takes into consideration the repairs of HVAC, electrical, and plumbing. And so the investment would still require us to hire new teachers. And I'm going to back up a little bit because I said a 10-year investment analysis. And so why did we do a 10-year? Because 10 years is what we have for enrollment projections. We don't have anything further than that. And as we move further into the future, projections become more and more unpredictable. And so we use the 10 years as our measuring tool. The second one that I wanted to show you is option 1. Option 1 takes into account enrollment. It takes into account the building infrastructure and educational programs. It does require, if you recall from our last presentation, it requires staffing, significant staffing. And so the 10-year investment is $45.6 million. The next option is option 4. And if you recall, that's 2 K2 buildings. Again, we would still need to increase our professional staff as well as support staff. But option 4 does address building infrastructure, enrollment, and educational programs. Option 4B is $32.5 million, and it addresses the same thing. It addresses enrollment, academic programs, and our building infrastructure. And so the last 3 that I just talked about are really apples to apples. This first one, which is the HVAC and electrical and plumbing, we couldn't call this an apple to apples comparison because it doesn't address the 3 components in the directive that we received from the board. And so I just wanted to show you this 10-year investment as a segue into Ms. Hughes' presentation on the bond investment. And I'm going to ask Ms. Hughes to come up and review that with the board.
Ms. Chicholi, before you jump into the bond investment, if we did your option 4B infrastructure spend, and then for some reason didn't do option 4B, what's wasted? I mean, have we done is everything we've done still necessary even if we don't do option 4B? Did that make sense? So if we've got infrastructure laid out that we're going to replace thinking about 4B, if you don't do 4B, we've still got to replace a lot of that same infrastructure. Are we wasting money? Did I say it better that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Possibly, I would have to leave that to Mr. Wentz.
It's really hard to answer that with a blanket statement. There are certain things that you can do, and you can say, okay, we know in the future we may have something, and we design it intelligently to plan for that. We're doing that with the chillers right now. We analyzed the chillers. We said, yes, this has useful life for future projects. Here's how to plan for the future project. Let's put some additional redundancy in there and additional capacity. Even went so far on some suggestions about looking at alternative refrigerants to plan for the future. That doesn't happen on every project. And the example of that would be, let's pick on East York. You're doing a 2-story addition onto that building, putting a significant amount of square footage onto that to handle capacity needs. The system that you would do for a building of that size may not be the same system that's there right now. And you can't just take the system that's there right now offline, convert it over, and realize the same kind of cost savings. So some of it is planning for the future, some of it is constraints of existing systems inside buildings. And you will be up against that question at Indian Rock in the near future, where you have to do some work to the main chiller, and how far do you go with that? Do you replace unit ventilators? Unit ventilators aren't up to current par for education facilities. So those questions are going to keep coming up as we go through this process. And the plan that's laid out is going to have to be fluid as these issues come up. You may say, okay, we know exactly what's happening to this building, and we should do it this way, whereas others you're going to say, okay, we need to replace the immediate issue and put the other components for another day, and we'll fight that later.
And that kind of cuts to my question. Right? We've got these immediate things, but we want to do the immediate things. We don't want to waste money, but we still want to spend toward wherever we may go.
And in the process, inevitably, you will waste money. The pump project that was recently completed about 1.5 years ago. Say again? The pumps, I'm sorry, the facilities building, when the pumps were replaced probably 1.5 years to 2 years ago, that process started. We aren't able to reuse many of those pumps in the chiller replacement. So the decision to replace the chillers the way it was is the right decision. It gives you guys redundancy, there's less chance of interruption of service, and it gives you guys the flexibility in the future to say, okay, we can do several things with this building without worrying about it. But those pumps weren't saved, and that came at a price tag. Now, the pumps are going to be kept as district property, and if there's another building that they can be used for, they're pretty new pumps and they'll be reused. But that's an example of, no, we're not always going to be able to use this one-to-one.
Thank you.
So let me ask a question here. We have a 10-year time frame here. If I look at the 30-year spend, right? So theoretically, you're using 1/3 of your time. 24 million out of 130 million is certainly not 1/3 of the spend. 30 to 33 million dollars for B is certainly not 1/3 of the spend. So what am I missing, or what bubble are we pushing out into the last 20 years?
So the difference between this analysis and what you see in PFM is that we've used cost avoidance. And so you cannot use cost avoidance in, I'll explain in a second. So we could not use cost avoidance in the PFM projections. So cost avoidance is, in option 1, we will need 68 teachers at the end of 3031. Option 4B, we would need 64 teachers. We currently do not have those staff members on staff. They're not included in our salary and benefits. So they're not cost savings. Okay? So my numbers include them as cost savings, but in reality, they're cost avoidance. In the PFM presentation, and Ms. Hughes will go into this further, she's using the actual cost savings. And those actual cost savings come from the support staff that we would not need should we choose to do option 4B. Melissa?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Hughes, and I'm here from PFM Financial Advisors. Um, and I'll kind of address your question a little bit as we get going, okay? A little bit too. What we're going to review in this portion is we're going to review the district's existing debt portfolio. I know the board members have seen this a bunch of times, but we have some new folks in the audience. And then we'll talk about four different bond financing scenarios related to each of these options that are under consideration. This, if you have a printout, if you're a board member, you have a printout, this top half of page number 3 is the district's existing debt service. So this is what the district has promised it will pay bond investors until the final maturity. So currently the district has a very short debt portfolio. All of its debt will be matured by 2031. That provides opportunity to go in and fill behind. We're using that wraparound structure, put principal as the old debt pays off to reduce as much as we can the upfront impact of any projects. This is what the bond you owe the bondholders, but you do get a little bit of reimbursement from the state, and that's what's visible on the bottom half of the page. So column 14 is an important column. That is the net effect to taxpayers of what you owe in your debt service. So you don't get a ton of reimbursement, but it is a little bit, especially in those earlier years. So column 14 is going to follow us through the rest of the presentation. This is what you have in your local budget right now that you can support, or you're supporting right now. The next few pages are some strategies that we use when we think about putting a financing plan together. We've discussed these in more detail at previous meetings, so I'm going to just talk about them as I talk about how we're implementing them. So this is a new page, page numbered 6. This is a new page, and this speaks to what Kathy was speaking about. You'll notice on this page there are kind of 2 groupings: indirect cost or cost savings and avoided additional costs, okay? So this is an important concept. You're going to do some changes to your staffing, to your transportation planning, to your utilities, potentially with all of these scenarios. They will have impacts, right? And depending on what those impacts are, they can actually increase or reduce costs from where you're at right now. So your baseline budget, okay? You know that in the future, if you do nothing based on your current enrollment projections, you will need more staff, right? Some of these scenarios may impact the amount of future staff additional costs that you need. Those are important when considering the overall project, but reductions or additions to that can't be used to pay for a project. That makes sense? Like, you can't take something that isn't in the budget now and use it to pay for debt service costs. You can only consider things that are in the budget now to pay for debt service costs. So we're focusing on the columns that say total in the blue, the orange, and the green columns. So you can see in your cost to maintain / option 1, you have both indirect costs and additional costs potentially in the future. Okay, just want to make sure everything's okay. In option 4, you can see that because of potential efficiencies with transportation, there are actually some indirect cost savings. So that's like real things that are in your budget right now that you could potentially experience some reductions on. Now, there are some potential additional costs associated with needing potentially additional staff. Those are in their kind of own column. In option 4, there's some potential staff savings. So savings from what's in the budget right now. Also potential transportation efficiencies. and that gives you total indirect cost savings. And then there's a little bit of, depending on which year you're in, some additional costs or some avoided costs when it comes to teachers. And we got this information from Kathy, so you could talk to her about the details. So this is an important concept, that you have kind of two pots of indirect cost savings, like real savings from current budget, and then potential changes, additions or subtractions in the future. So like I said, those total columns are what we're going to focus on in this analysis, because that's the only thing you can bring to the bank, right? Well, not the literal bank, but you get my idea. So a lot of the rest of this handout's going to look very familiar. This is the analysis that corresponds to the cost to maintain scenario. So I know the board is aware of this, but for those in the public who might not know, the district borrowed money in 2019 that they haven't spent yet. And there's approximately $9 million. So that money can and should be used on whatever the district's next capital project is. So we're assuming that it gets used here. And then you would need to borrow an additional $45.8 million to get you a total project cost of $54.8 million. And I'm sure that these numbers will continue to change over time as the board would make decisions. You can see the debt service associated there in column 12. That would be your existing local effort plus the additional borrowings, which you can see in columns 8, 9, 10, and 11. Column 13, that column has been there before, but it's been blank. Now we had that total column from the previous page, the blue, filled in there to get us our net effort. So our actual staffing costs and transportation if there was anything there, plus our real debt service costs to say how much do we need to find in our budget, okay? But then you also have the additional staff on top of that. Yep. Yes. Yes. Yes, less indirect cost or savings. Savings would be shown negatively. Mm-hmm. It's okay. I could illustrate it that way in the future if you'd prefer. Okay. Yep. The important part. So keeping on that vein, right? You would, in this scenario, focusing here on column 6, need to find incremental net debt service and those additional costs in your budget of, here we're illustrating about 2.5 million over that time period. Because you have overlap of when your existing debt pays off and when your new debt comes online. That equates to a millage equivalent of 1.42 mils based on your current millage. And this is updated from the most up-to-date millage value available from Kathy. You're going to see in all of these that we're going to illustrate on the purple side a way you could phase the millage in more gradually if you wanted to. That doesn't mean you have to. We're just kind of spreading it out more evenly so that you're not taking all of the budget impact there in 2026. which is the high point in this illustration. And it lets you take advantage of kind of those 2 years at the end where you're having like smaller phase-ins to phase it in. This, in this scenario, puts millage in place a little bit more slowly than you're actually spending it. So you would use some funds on hand towards that goal of kind of slowing the millage coming online. The purple illustration isn't, like what that looks like isn't super important right now. The important idea is that once you hone in on something, we can help you, show you illustrations of what you could do with that, right? It's a planning tool. Think of it that way. I think we've talked about that before. So does everybody understand like how to read and understand what these pages are telling you? Because then the next pages build on and just look at different amounts. So option 1, again, using that $9 million that the district has in already borrowed proceeds, borrowing an additional $122 million to get $131,105 of projects. In column 16, you can see the total debt service. Column 17, we have those same indirect, and you're going to make the same comment, so it's applicable here too. Column 18 has that net impact of 16 plus 17 gives you 18. There we go. Perfect. The next page illustrates that this would cost 3.21 mils overall. The highest year would be again in 2026 in this illustration. And you can see there in column 10, we've just spread them out kind of equally or as equally as we could to illustrate what that would look like. You notice in column 14 in this illustration, this would put mills in place a little bit faster that you need. So you bank some mills that you could then spend later to kind of mitigate the size of those millage increases, primarily in 25 and 26. Next, I'm going to illustrate option 4. Again, same concept here. We're using our 9 million. We're borrowing 125 million to produce a project size of 134 million. You can see in column 16, that's your debt service over time. Column 17, this one does have indirect cost savings in most years. And you can see that's netted against to produce column 18. This illustration produces a millage equivalent of 3 mils evenly. Again, that high point is in 2026 in this illustration. And you can see that you're, again, putting a little bit more in place earlier, using it to smooth out. This uses a little bit less cash than the last scenario, a little bit more than the first one, a little bit less than the last one. And the last scenario looks at $130 million of projects of borrowing to produce $139 million of projects. Column 16 is your borrowed proceeds. Column 17 is your indirect cost savings. Give you your net impact of column 18. And this one is a little bit lower than the previous two options, but not as low as the cost to maintain. for a millage equivalent of 2.86 mils. I just want to conclude kind of this walkthrough of the numbers with a few thoughts about how at PFM we think about and approach planning for big projects and how we'll continue to work with you over time. And I'm going to tell a story maybe. So I work at Mechanicsburg Area School District, and they are midway through a project very much like the ones you're considering. They are going to touch all of their elementary schools. They have 5 of them, I think. And their high school, they don't need work at their middle school. It's just not needed. And in the process, they did a big grade realignment. So had some of the same kind of sensitivities. When we started working with them on this particular set of projects in 2014, we came and brought some illustrations like these ones, and they gave kind of general ranges. This is to help you get a general impression of, from a conservative place, what this would cost. Every decision you make in conjunction with your administration and your architect will impact how we work with you to do the financing. So for them, we really thought their big borrowings were going to be kind of later in 23 and 2024. And it actually turned out, because of some stuff that went on with COVID and how low rates were, they reorganized the kind of sequence that they did the projects in to move the high school up earlier, because they could do that, and it made a lot of sense for them. So I think I'm telling you this story to know that even as you may pick a path to go down, and it might take you a lot more time to make a decision on like what path makes sense, you will, as a board, have a lot of opportunities to make decisions that will kind of impact the path of that river, right? And we'll be here with you to show you different illustrations, to hone in as we get closer and closer on, okay, well, these are kind of rough numbers, right? But then the architects will come back, or we'll hear from Kathy, oh, it's not, 27 million for this piece, it's 25.5, but this other piece got $1 million larger. And, we'll work with you to make adjustments to the plan so that it is a living, breathing reflection of kind of your decisions. I'm happy to take questions now.
Mr. Chicholi, if I might, is there any way to go directly from, say, column 18 to what the district's budget will look like under these different scenarios? That's how I feel like I need to see it, because it'll put all the numbers in one place. I know that you're fighting a mismatch between 10 years of enrollment projections and a longer debt service period. So there's this point at which the enrollment data kind of run out, but you've still got projections you can do for the debt service.
Mm-hmm.
I would feel a whole lot more comfortable with my understanding of all of this if I could see what impact this has on, say, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th year, or 8th, 9th, and 10th year from now of a district budget, where we've closed a gap in operational costs, but we've increased the line item for debt service, and it's a wash, or it's not a wash, or it's more than a wash. That's how I need to see it.
Okay. I think that is a reasonable question. Like I say during all of my budget presentations, that budget projections are really just budget projections, right? And I think what's going to be important is the conversation on what those assumptions are, right? Are we considering a tax increase? Are we considering a full gamut of personnel requests? What does the BEF look like? What does our EIT look like? So I am going to need some information from the board as we create those budget projections, but I can certainly do that for you.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with assumptions. It's kind of an occupational hazard. So.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes. page 6. Yes. Yes, I did notice that, and so we can update these to include an inflation factor.
It'll make your numbers that are large, you know, by the time you get out there, it'll make them look very, and that's fine, as long as everybody knows what is. We didn't really want to, especially not before, and really call the options, show that the costs are getting crazy.
Right, Dr. Krause?
Okay, as Mr. Schaub brings it up, just one clarifying question to the board as I was kind of summarizing that feedback. In the effort to the timeline, there was a mention to the onboarding process of the new superintendent. So was the direction to extend that communication timeline out to the onboarding of the new superintendent? I just want to make sure that I heard that feedback correctly.
I think what I would say is extend the communication piece out enough to make sure that there's community input, but there are no promises from the board that by the end of, say, January, you're going to get a, we'll sign on the dotted line.
Gotcha. Okay, fantastic. So kind of just to wrap everything up and bring some pieces into play, we wanted to talk a little bit about what factors we use to make this decision and inevitably turn it over to Dr. Williams to conclude. So as always, we're keeping our eye on that vision and again, those strategic principles that was provided to us and voted on by the board through the mission. What we did was we took the guiding principles, the strategic principles, and we applied them to a rubric. And we took each one of those options, option 1 being there was no change, option 2 was a slight improvement, 3 moderate improvement, and a score of 4 was an optimal efficiency or an optimal improvement. So what you can see as we took each one of the guiding principles and we applied them through each of the options on that scoring rubric, which of course gives us those scoring of how we help to assess which option would provide the greatest score for us to make this recommendation. And with that being said, you can see how each one of those scores. Again, now a 1 would be no change in whatsoever. So you can see each one of the options that we were investigating. This study did provide an increase in those guiding principles. Option 4B was able for us to achieve those maximum pieces. And with that and that criteria analysis that we use, I would then turn it over to Dr. Williams for some summations.
Thank you, Dr. Krauser. Thank you, other members of the committee. Our recommendation, as you well know now, is for 4B, and I'd just like to recap some of the some additional recap as to how we got here. It's important to note that this process started in 2016, prior to my arrival here, and when I got here, I was told that we put off facilities decisions for the new superintendent. Isn't that right, Mr. Posnell? So
There was always an option for the existing superintendent to stay.
yes, that is true. Now, this is my recommendation, administrative recommendation. You have it before you. It's 4B. A process that started back in 2016 with a lot of starts and stops, particularly as far as the pandemic is concerned. That put a small hiatus in that process, but we got back to it during the pandemic, so we could come to you today with a recommendation. The strategic principles have been discussed already. Those strategic principles were the guiding force behind what we did as far as the studies we undertook. And we came originally with 5 studies to consider. The board feedback on 2 of those, option study 4 and study 5, was to add a different wrinkle to item 4 and option 4 and option 5. And we ended up recommending one of those wrinkles, the wrinkle for option 4. That's where 4B comes from, was board feedback at the time. The other studies that we eliminated for one or more of the following reasons. It either did not meet academic principles, it was cost prohibitive, it didn't, or there was not enough real estate on which to build, and student populations in some of those options in those buildings would have been too large and unmanageable. So we applied the guiding principles to the remaining options, and that's how we come to the administrative recommendation of study 4B. The rationale is all outlined in the superintendent's report. They'll be posted on the superintendent's page and will be in the minutes of tonight's meeting. And that'll be our recommendation going forward. Other questions we might be able to answer?
I have a question. So going back to Dr. Krauser's little bubble thing with the 4 bubbles on the outside and the 1 in the middle. If I look at Plan 1 versus Plan 4B, Plan 1 has me at $130 million. I'm looking at the PFM study, right? $130 million of total spend on, what is it, 54 million in borrowing, right? If I look at 4B, I've got $260 million on $140 million of borrowing, right? So there's a big hole between the two of those. So how much of those 4 bubbles on the outside could be achieved with that difference there versus putting the buildings in place? Is my question clear?
Well,
Almost.
if I can make a slight correction,
Okay.
the 54 million is the cost to maintain, so that only addresses the HVAC, electrical. and
I'm looking at the
okay.
cost to maintain versus what the
4B.
recommendation
Okay.
is. So there's a big amount of money sitting there in between. Are any of those 4 bubbles on the outside, could they be addressed by the difference in spending without having to do the 4B plan?
The option to maintain does not take into account enrollment projections.
Okay. How much of the difference does enrollment projections?
It makes a big difference.
Big how? 50%, 75%? How much of it? It's a huge number.
It is a huge number. The option to maintain, the maintaining, whatever vernacular you want to use, because we talked about labeling this differently, because it truly
Plan
is not
1.
an option.
Plan 1
Plan 0.
or 0. Yeah.
I like to call it 0 because it's not an option. It does not address the growing enrollment needs unless you decide to increase class sizes.
Okay.
That would be the only way to be able to do that at option 0. So with option 0, you'd still have to spend money adding on to buildings. That's not factored in option 0.
Okay.
So the cost of that is really option 1. Option 0 is not an option. Option 1 is. So you have to compare option 1 to 4B.
I don't know if I agree with it.
Why not?
Because you're making an assumption that the population is going to build on a trend line here and that we don't have another option to fix that population build.
3 different enrollment projections and discounting PDs altogether because they were out of whack. The 3 different enrollment projections all showed similar things, independently done, not in collaboration with each other.
Okay.
So it'd be a little hard for me to argue that enrollment could possibly stay flat.
No, not sold on it yet.
I'm sorry?
I'm not sold on it yet.
That's okay. That's okay.
It's a lot of money.
We got time. It is a lot of money. But here's how I like to look at it. You can spend money to put Band-Aids on things and have no better result, or you can spend a little bit more money to get a better result that's longer lasting. It's about spending money wisely as opposed to just spending money. And I know we're all about that. Everybody can kind of agree with that concept in general. because
Yeah, I
no-
guess I'm defining a little more money a little differently. This is
Yeah.
a lot more money.
Well, not option zero.
Yeah, option
You
0
gotta pay-
versus 4B.
You gotta pay.
I am going to look at option 0. It's on the table and laid out for me. That's a big amount of spend.
But if you go with option zero, and if that could work, it can't, but if it could, you gain nothing but fixing the plumbing, the
I get real
electricity.
nervous when I hear can'ts and won'ts and absolutes.
Okay. But you're getting nothing but better electrical system, better plumbing, better mechanicals. That's all you gain. It doesn't address any programmatic needs at all, and it doesn't address enrollment.
Can somewhere in between 0 and 4B.
I wouldn't dispute that, but
I don't
zero
know.
is not an option.
I don't know.
I think you and I can have some more conversation about this, and I think we probably will.
Is now the time to express concerns or ask questions, or are we saving that down the road, Mr. Posnow?
I guess it depends on the concerns. I would argue that feel free to ask any questions to understand what's going on, you know.
Okay. Well, I've had a community member or two say to me in, trying to be abreast of these proposals, say that you're taking the two newest buildings, the newest building and the one that has most recently been, completely renovated, Valley View and Yorkshire, and totally changing their use and purpose and creating, huge costs to do that. And is that wasted money? You're just wasting the money that we spent on Yorkshire because, under that proposal, it's going to be just an administration building. And Valley View, we spent all that money renovating it to make it the warm and fuzzy place that Valley View is for our youngest learners. And now you're going to undo all of that in just, 15 years or so, and make it a secondary building. And isn't that wasted money? And I'm not sure I know how to respond to that. I'm open for responses.
No, I don't believe it's wasted money because you have to look at the whole big picture. The whole big picture is to gain efficiencies throughout. So sometimes you have to spend a little money to save more money. And this is one of those cases. So if you look at the big picture of it all, you're going to get a better program, get better operational efficiencies, and a better opportunity for instruction. If we look at any one building in isolation, it doesn't allow you to see the positive gains as an organization, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I understand, and on some level, I think agree with you, but somehow when you're spending taxpayer dollars, it's a little bit more of a bitter pill to swallow. I think I just have to, consider it and sort of process the whole suggestion. And I'm not sure that's going to fly with these individuals, just telling them to look at the bigger picture. And it just seems like it's, I don't know, good money after bad, if I could use that phrase, like we've already spent all this money and now you're, redoing it for a totally different purpose. And are we gaining? I guess the ultimate question is, are we gaining? Are we really benefiting? Is it really going to be a better program than the one we currently have? Some would argue if it ain't fixed, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I just, like I say, I'm working on it, but I appreciate that input.
Sure.
I would defer to the expert on my left here about economics, but this falls under the heading of something called sunk cost. And it's a very difficult thing for a lot of people to let go of money that's already been spent on something. But the point of the analysis here, and whether we agree with the numbers or not, is to illustrate exactly why we shouldn't hold on to sunk costs. That the reconfiguration of the district gives us a better financial picture if we make these investments than if we hang on to the prior investment. It may seem counterintuitive. You say, and Lois Ann, you're right, the optics are interesting, to say the least. To take a building that's 10 years old or so, that was a state-of-the-art, best practices building at the time, when we have others in the district that are 40 years old, 50, 60 years old, that were not built with that and couldn't possibly have reflected best practices in 2010 because they were built in 1960 or something like that. But when we look at the numbers, if the numbers play out to the tune that's being projected here, that should help people understand that, at least from an economic standpoint, it really does make sense to reconfigure or repurpose those buildings. That's the best use of that, even though it's only 10 years old or only 8 years old or whatever happens to be the number. It's an asset that we're not abandoning. We're still going to get plenty of use out of it in a different capacity.
Well, I think the argument would be that Yorkshire is basically going to be abandoned. I mean, you're going to move administrators there and use it as an early learning, but a lot of that space won't be used for what some might call legitimate educational purposes. I mean, housing administrators and technology, I get that that's important, but I'm looking at hands-on, teaching kindergartners, and some might argue that that doesn't compare. So I appreciate that, Joel.
I think it's an interesting and it's a legitimate argument. It's certainly a legitimate concern. Most of us are brought up to preserve investments and to make the investment work rather than just blow it away and start from scratch. And it looks like that's what's happening.
Well, it does. I'm just thinking if you, remodel your, kitchen or, home or whatever, and then in, 10, 15 years, you say, oh, I don't like that color anymore. I'm going to tear it all down. So I'm processing, I'm working on it. So I appreciate that input too,
Well,
Joel. Thank you.
Lots of time to process.
I think at this point, I'd like to make an observation. A few years ago, the board went to the administration that what I would call with less than clear direction or guidelines about how to solve our functional problems within the buildings and our academic processes. The administration delivered various options at that point, and the board said, no, that's not what we want. Then the board said more clearly, here are the guidelines, here's what we want. So what I'd like to do is, whether or not the board moves forward on any of these or whether or not we change again, I think the administration has done a great job in responding to all possible options and actually delivering on proposals that could work. So I'd like to take a minute and thank the administration for the work they've done, even though we appear less than excited about the
I can't imagine how frustrated they must feel right now. And I for whatever it's worth, I apologize about your inevitable frustration. We're not easy folks to work with, and that's too bad, but that's the way it is.
John, I want to chime, I mean, and I do appreciate the efforts because I wanted to see the numbers played out as well. But I think Seth deserves some gratitude as well.
Yeah,
In a
absolutely.
conversation, I know he hasn't said anything, but he's not charging for his time to be here to do these presentations week in and week out. And that's because he cares about the district, because his kids go to the district. So I know you're not going to say something, so I'll embarrass you in person and say thank you. I thought that was very kind of you to do.
You can't sit here for all these years and not appreciate this kind of effort. Question, Dr. Williams, real quick. How sure are you of the population figures that we have? We've looked at some of these and they're talking about huge numbers of hundreds of students, and I've got it here. How sure are you of those? Because that's a big driving force is what our population is going to look like.
Yeah, absolutely is a big driving force. And I take comfort in the fact that there are 3 different independent demographic studies done, and they all reach similar conclusions. You know, they're never exact, but they're close enough to be considered that we're heading in the right direction with projections.
Do you think we're going to get some of those big numbers? A couple of them were up in.
I do, because there
I'm
are
trying to
plenty.
figure out where we're going to put those home wise.
Well, you have to consider that there are people who are empty nesters who will at some point leave their current home, and the people that will move into that home are typically going to have children. I was talking to one of your colleagues on the board today about his neighborhood and how it's changed dramatically from empty nesters moving out and families moving in. And we're going to see that continue to happen because of the educational programming that's here.
But at the same time, I'm interested in how many, unfortunately, students we've lost. Now, I know during the pandemic, people made other choices, and that's fine. And whether these choices are going to continue, or are they going to come back, or, what happens in the future
Right.
as things like this seem to be hanging on, kind of stuff, and it will have a major impact on, fortunately or unfortunately. I'm thrilled my neighborhood has gained a lot of young people, but they moved from other places in the district, so that doesn't really count. I'm looking at new people moving in.
So they moved from other places in the district, and who moved into their homes?
Well, they had smaller homes. Yeah. Oh, I understand. It's a domino effect. It just keeps, changing. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good. Well, thank you, everybody. Hey, Ms. Chicholi.
You have before you the business office report. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, I would ask a motion be made to approve the below mentioned items 1 through 7.
Are you asking for questions before that motion is made?
We should do a motion and then.
Okay. Because the wording is always the opposite.
Yeah. I have a question.
Can we
Do we have a motion
and
first?
then
So
we'll-
moved.
Second.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now,
On number 7, the recommendation that we contract with CCIU, is that a contract that if we decide on another method of a search, is that something that could be easily broken, or how definite is that? I mean, have we committed? Are we getting ready to make a definite commitment?
well, if we vote on it, we're making a commitment. We haven't made a commitment yet.
I'd like to have that considered separately, please.
Okay. Okay, who could, will?
I did, and I'll amend it,
Okay,
leaving, so it's 1 through 6, my motion amended to say 1 through 6. She's seconding it.
okay.
I have questions on number 5.
On the Lincoln IU educational program for the
Yes.
math audit.
Yes. You guys might remember that I'm a kind of a math-oriented member of the board, so I took a pretty close look at the information that was provided and just wanted to make a couple of points of concern. One is, I guess, the overall purpose of this appeared to be, like a typical audit, and it concentrated a lot on alignment of curricula as sort of a primary. Well, I'm curious to know, first of all, this amount of money that's set aside, could that be used for other purposes? Is that something that specifically has to be spent on a math audit?
The grant, the additional ARP money could be used for social emotional.
Okay. So it's not specifically for this. It can be spent on this, but it's not earmarked
There
for
are
a
other
math
reasons
audit.
why it could be spent, yes.
Okay. I took a look at the effort and some of the deliverables and just wanted to point a couple things out. For example, the curriculum audit for courses has 15 hours for preparation and no time for presentation. And then if you go down to the presentation to the board, it looks like we'll get about an hour and a half of presentation to cover this entire study. unless I misread it. Classroom observations, 3 hours of prep and 12 hours of presentation. It just doesn't seem like it's balanced right, for one thing. The other, administrative interviews, no preparation time and no presentation time. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that. Focus groups that would involve a broader community, 1 hour of prep and 1 hour of presentation. It just seemed to me as I read this that the allocation of effort was pretty heavy in, I guess, the technical audit, the curriculum audit for courses, assessment audits, whatever those were, and very little time to interact with administration or with the board. Other concerns I have are that the testimonials, looking at Gettysburg and Hanover, there was no mention of impact at all on academic performance that resulted from the work. There was no reference to recommendations that they made. Red Lion testimonial was for an audit that was done for 7th and 8th grade ELA, which is really not relevant to our assignment. The Southeastern study was K-8 alignment, but again, no mention of teacher evaluation or recommendations. So I'd like to know if it's possible to dig a little deeper, just to find out what the impact of these audits would be. $65,000 is a pretty decent amount of money. And then I wanted to just make some points about the resumes. The principal investigators, Travato, BS in math, 4 years as a high school math teacher. From what I can tell, no experience or qualifications at all in teaching elementary math, and that's half our curriculum. McLaughlin, long CV, but minimal experience or qualifications in teaching elementary math. Connor, qualifications in secondary math curriculum and instruction. My sense is that if we're going to make progress in mathematics, we need to concentrate more heavily on elementary math. And that's sort of the observation I'm making, is that it's not really oriented toward elementary math instruction. Qualifications of teachers, their comfort level with mathematics as opposed to procedure, those sorts of things. And that the principal investigators are really not expert, from what I can tell, in elementary math instruction. That's my concern. Thank you.
Dr. Krauser?
I can share, first of all, to the latter question regarding elementary. Yeah, that was a discussion item. In comparative sense, the other assessment teams that were reviewed did not have an elementary decision either. We have been working closely with the IU, and actually one of the members of that team has already been into the building and has done some instructional mathematic work with East York at that time. So they are familiar with their everyday math program. Have been a part of that. So that was one experience, not listed in their resume, but as an experience that they've had a part of. The second question with regards to the deliverables and the estimated time, the original proposal came from the estimation based on the number of staff, personnel, and anticipated number of hours it would take to conduct the review of those documentations and how well organized they are. That's why it's an estimate. When we kind of broke down what we would see for those particular numbers regarding the number of classroom observations, we don't, and as I shared earlier, we don't anticipate it to reach that final number, but we wanted to give ourselves that window in the estimate to ensure that we had the time to do that. With regards to the first question in the deliverables, each one of those items, they listed out. We can go back and ask for more components to the board. Really, the purpose of this audit is to provide the administrative team with those results so that we can make informed decisions on the next steps to ensure the alignment, the materials, the assessments, to determine that the instruction is aligned with our assessment and our curriculum materials, and then how the administration can use that information to better align our curriculum.
I appreciate that, Dr. Krauser. Could we also get some information from these references, in these testimonials, to see if there was really any action taken on their part to implement recommendations? And if so, what was the academic impact?
I can get more specific. I know one particular that I spoke to, the information was used specifically in their comprehensive plan work. So the recommendation helped drive some of their comprehensive plan work, but I'll be more specific to those questions.
Well, I'm really concerned to know if there was any impact on academic performance.
So we ready to move forward? Do you want to put it off? That's true.
I'd like that considered separately, yes. And that
Uh,
if I were to vote no on it, that doesn't mean don't do it ever, but I think we need a little bit more information before we commit this money.
So let's see, Lois, I believe you made the motion. Could you amend one more time?
Well, I will, but not until I say this. I, I I have concerns that we are getting out into the weeds, if that is really in fact our purview to analyze the CVs of people who are going to do an audit. To me, that's something that the administration should have vetted, and I trust that they have done so. I say this respectfully, Joel. I just think we're getting in the weeds and it's not our business. But I will, as a collegial step in that direction, I wish you could see the smile on my face. I will amend my, whatever it was, motion.
So now your motion is
I'm
one,
eliminating 5 and I've eliminated
one,
7.
one through 4 and 6.
There we go. Mrs. Fryrick, are you,
Thank you. I hate to ask, other questions?
and
Let's have a individual vote, I guess.
On items 1 through 4 and number 6, Mr. G,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader, Mr. Posnell,
Yes.
Mr. Sears,
Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson. Motion passes.
Now, can we have a motion for item 5?
so moved.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. All right. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Robinson. Yes. Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
No.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Yes.
Mr. Sears,
No.
Mr. Posnell,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader,
Yes,
Mr. G.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now, can we have a motion for item 7?
so moved.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
Just to clarify, this is the CCIU to help us hire a new superintendent.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just looking because I think we needed more conversation as a board before engaging this company. That's all.
About,
About our process as a whole and whether this was who we wanted to conduct this search.
other questions? Can we have a roll call vote?
Mr. Posnell,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader,
Yes,
Mr. Sears,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick,
No.
Mr. G,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Motion passes. Okay. Item B, the administration recommends the board award the electrical contract for the central plant chiller replacement project to McCarty and Sons in the amount of $121,972. This project will be funded through ESSER 3 funds upon approval of the Pennsylvania Department of Education.
so moved.
Second.
Thank you. Questions? I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item C is the recommendation from the administration for the board to approve the general fund interfund transfer of $454,785 to capital reserves.
So moved.
Thank you. Questions or comments?
Question. What is the source of that?
This is the transfer tax of the deed that happened a little bit over a month ago. It was unanticipated.
Good. I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Item D is a recommendation from the administration for the board to approve the referral agreement with WellSpan Phil Haven Family-Based Mental Health Services effective January 1st of 2022 through January 1st of 2024.
So moved.
Thank you. Questions? What exactly do we get in this agreement?
This is an opportunity for the administration to refer students to counseling services,
Okay.
and then they provide the service to the student.
Do they provide them here, or are the students referred to the facilities that?
Oh, Scott, do you know?
Could you repeat that question one time?
Are the students referred to Phil Haven's facilities, or are the services provided here?
They would be referred there if necessary. There is some outpatient work that might be done on site, but if necessary, they would be referred there.
Okay. Are we confident our students aren't going to have inordinate wait times connected with their referral?
Confident, I would say, through all those processes, we're seeing a tremendous amount of wait time, whether it's in the queue or even in a facility. But I think our experience with them to date has been pretty positive, that they've been able to work with us to ensure the students get the access they need as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But I will say that generally we're seeing a difficult process in that timing for all students.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Other questions? I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. And the last item under the business office report is the recommendation for the board to approve the parent transportation contract with Ms. Jessica Warner from September 8th to 2021 through December 23rd, 2021. The parent will be reimbursed the IRS mileage rate.
So moved.
Thank you. Questions?
Can you give us an estimate of the total number of days and the total cost?
Yes, 72 days for a total cost of $681.41.
Thank you.
I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. And that concludes the business office report.
Thank you. Ms. Casey.
All right, so this past weekend we had our holiday concert here at the high school, which went really well, and good job to all of our musicians who participated in that. And on Thursday, the Impact Foundation had their holiday event where we collected donations from building drives across the district, and families were able to come and get Christmas presents, and the children were able to enjoy hot chocolate and coloring, and it was a really heartwarming and great event to see happening. Some upcoming sporting events we had a wrestling match tonight. You guys might have heard it going on, so hopefully that went well. Tomorrow we have a boys basketball game here and a swim meet, and the next girls basketball game, home game, I believe is January 4th. So that's all I have for you tonight.
Is the swim meet here? Thank you.
John, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Back in the day, we used to get as a part of our agenda an activities report that had things like concert dates and activities that were going on in the next. Help me, Ellen, John, do you remember those? No, we don't get that anymore. I'm just wondering if there's a reason for that or if it's just an oversight.
I don't remember that. No.
It wasn't prior to the internet. I'm not that dinosaur-like, am I?
No, there have been on and off various reports. There used to be one very specifically about athletics from the athletic director.
Well, I thought it was called activities report. Okay, never mind.
Well,
I've been told I'm a dinosaur. I need to look at the
well,
internet.
I
Thank you very much.
I'll support you there, Mrs. Dinosaur. There is the calendars that you can go to on our website. Unfortunately, if you want to print them out, they don't print real well, so you can't really, for those of us who don't have kids involved, but they're available.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Robinson, personnel.
Thank you, Mr. Posnell. You have before you the personnel report. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
Thank you.
And I have a question on number 3 and number 4, where these substitute teachers are going to be assigned.
They are currently already staffed. So half of the year they were with STS. The second year they will be York Suburban employees. So we have one at the one at the high school and one at Indian Rock.
Okay, high school and Indian Rock. Thank you.
Other questions? I think
That concludes my report.
well, you gonna let us vote?
You gonna let us vote, or we're just gonna?
Wait, what?
Are you gonna let us vote before you
I'm not hearing
conclude?
you, John.
We have to vote.
We didn't vote.
No.
Well, hell, fellas, let's vote.
I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Now you can be done.
We're getting off the rails here.
That concludes my report.
Ms. Schrader, are you doing academic?
Yes. The Academic Standards and Curriculum Committee recommends the following new high school courses for board approval. They're listed for you there, A through J. Consider that a motion.
Thank you. Questions or comments? I think this can
Oh,
be.
I might as well just comment since I
Jump in.
had a little bug here. I will vote for this, but I'm concerned that we're putting things into the curriculum that deviate from what I guess I would consider to be the things that we really need to concentrate on. And those are items F, how things work, H, sports literature. We had 11 enrolled in that course in 2003-04. We dropped it. And writing to frighten, whatever that is. So I'm just voicing some concern. I'll vote for this because I trust Brian's judgment.
Careful, you might be falling into the dinosaur category right there with me,
I
Joel.
probably am, Lois Ann. Admittedly.
So I think this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson, got any legislative news for us?
Yes, I do. Since we're talking about dinosaurs, let me take you back to 1975, when the federal government passed the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and promised schools throughout the land that they would fund this act with 40% of the costs. Now, it may surprise you to learn that today, the federal government only provides 14% of the cost. Now, I see the look of incredulity, but it's true. So legislation has been proposed by Senator Chris Van Hollen to require the federal government to raise their commitment to the aforementioned 40%. Anybody who wishes to urge our local representatives to co-sponsor this legislation, that would be much appreciated. In addition, you may feel some trepidation because the legislature is back in session. And in the words of the immortal Tiny Tim, God help us, everyone. We're going to need it. They've moved on special education funding, which they will introduce recommendations after the first of the year. HR 2071 will establish a broadband development authority, if passed. HR 1332 will require schools to post online information about the school curriculum. HR 4112 is aimed at easing the substitute teacher crisis that we're facing. HR 2045 will require an adoption of Science of Reading literacy program, and the Senate is considering Bill 937 to prohibit vaccine mandates, and this passed along party lines. That concludes my report, if there are no questions.
Thank you. Ms. Farrar.
I always get to go after that. If we could change the alphabetical order of these reports sometime, maybe I'd get to be the first there. Lincoln Intermediate Report from the JOA, we just met, and we had good news that both the health clinic at the York Learning Center and out in New Oxford will be opening in January. And lo and behold, they had some difficulty getting some of the last pieces of equipment that they needed due to the supply chain issues that everybody has suffered from. But they are looking to have what we would call a soft opening in January, and then by February, March be in full swing. So I think that's good news from the JOA. York Adams Academy, I am pleased to announce that at our graduation on December 7th, we had 3 graduates from York Suburban. Kadira Fury, James Gatewood, and Keegan Williams were among the 22 graduates, so I congratulate them on their accomplishments. And we had our reorganization, and I have the privilege of continuing as president of that board. And I thank my colleagues on the YAA board, and our budget will be presented ready and be sent to the districts after our January meeting towards the end of January. And that concludes my report unless there are any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
York County School of Technology.
Did you skip Mrs. Chicholi?
I did. How about that?
That's okay. I don't have a report.
Oh, okay.
I knew that.
Okay. Yes, I wanted to share that Landon Seipel, who's a 9th grader at the York County School of Technology, but whose home school is York Suburban, was recognized as Student of the Month in November. Student of the Month selections are made by teachers in each academy and are based on exemplary academic, behavioral, and attendance standards, student leadership, contributions to the school, and participation in extracurricular activities. Landon is a student in Power Sports Technology. That's his academy at the School of Technology. So I'd like to recognize Landon and congratulate him for this honor. It's been tradition, Mr. Staub, that we send him a letter of recognition from the superintendent. I don't know if under your watch that's been done. Just sharing that, I'll get information to you. And I'd also like to ask my fellow board members to take a look at the information Dr. Williams shared in his weekly update about the School of Technology budget, and reach out either to him or to me with any questions. We'll be discussing that at the January planning meeting and then voting on it in January, so at the regular meeting later in the month. So if there are any questions, I'd like to sort of be on top of those and ask for assistance from the School of Technology administrators if we need that. And that concludes my report unless there are questions.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all the people who have sat with us tonight through a not short session. There is a link here to the board meeting and committee schedule, and this would be your last opportunity for public comment.
Good evening. My name is Lynn Leopold Sharp. I live at 744 Dogwood Circle in York. It's my pleasure and privilege to speak with you this evening. I want first to thank the board, the administration, the staff, all the contractors, all the financial guys for the extensive amount of work that you've put into the FFP process. It's most impressive, and I understand there's been a great deal of community input in that as well. But I have some concerns to share with you because that has been an extremely detailed process with a lot of input. But at the end of the day, you needed to reach a decision. You need to reach a recommendation, and you've reached that point. But the timeline that you're proposing for January suggests virtually no time for response. As I look at the schedule, your public meeting is scheduled for Wednesday evening, and 12 days later, the proposal was that the board would vote yea or nay. Here is my biggest concern. there are many people who will not listen to tonight's meeting online or will not listen to the videotape of it. So to begin with, your January 12th meeting starts with reiterating the entire proposal. Perhaps not all the background, but you have to give all of the proposal data as a baseline before people can even ask questions or make statements. I also think that there are going to be any number of questions that you cannot answer on the spot. There may be questions about data. There might be a question, as Mrs. Schrader suggested, about the research background about secondary campuses. There could be any number of public questions that you can't answer on the spot. So I don't see any time in the schedule before the 21st, 4th, to allow the administration and or board to respond to those public questions. I also think that there could be recommendations from the public that you would want to consider, that you had no way of hearing during the whole FFP process because their recommendations were specific to the proposal that was adopted or that is being recommended, that they couldn't really make general recommendations when they didn't know what direction you were going in. And so I think that the appearance is lip service to public comment, but we really don't care. We're going to go ahead and do something, unless the board were to vote no on the 24th. I think that's a very serious optic problem. And there's no question that this district has moved slowly in the past. When we changed the attendance borders for the first time in 50 years, we did it over a period of 15 months. Was that necessary? I don't know. Was that successful? Extremely so. So I really urge you not to essentially waste all this effort you've done by trying to railroad a decision at the very end. I think that's a serious problem. And I would share one other concern. You're talking about having a public meeting in the middle of January. What's the suggestion or the recommendation if it's snowed out? So you can't meet on, maybe there's a snowstorm on the 12th and 13th, so you have to reschedule the meeting, so there's even less time. Or what if the COVID numbers are so high that the recommendation from the county health or our own medical experts is you shouldn't hold an in-person meeting? I truly believe, even with masks, that public meeting needs to be held in person, cannot be held virtually. So I think the timeline doesn't provide any wiggle room whatsoever. Now, having sat on that side of the table for many decades, I understand the challenge you face because the desire to make a decision to move forward with the design to be able to accommodate construction projects that take advantage of a lot of downtime in the summers and whatnot. So it's not like you can delay that decision 2 months and it doesn't have other ramifications operationally. I'm well aware of that. But from my perspective, this is too important a decision for the board to make in haste, and that an opportunity for the public to speak openly and freely will be the best bet for public acceptance. On my last comment to Dr. Williams about the enrollment studies, I think you have to be aware that if the recommendation is adopted and the structure of our buildings is changed, that it is possible that current residents or future residents will decide not to send their kids to our schools. They will look at alternative options because they're uncomfortable with those changes. So that decision could in of itself affect our enrollment. Thank you.
Well, I think I would make the observation that, one, this has not been a quick process. This has been a 3-year process. The other observation I would make is what we decided tonight was to extend that timeline to allow for exactly what you're describing. Yeah. So I would just leave it there. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening. A lot of points that the last speaker made were very good.
Name and address, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Courtney Shinsky. I live at 24 South Rockburn Street. One of the things that she mentioned kind of ties into something that I want to talk about, and that's the optics of this public comment. I wrote email to all of the board members, and I'm here before you again speaking. I also submitted another comment online. And that was that after attending the LGBTQ panel held at the middle school, I was able to sit in a YS school building without a mask and attend that meeting, something I was not permitted to do in the last few months in any other circumstance, including attending a public school board meeting like this one tonight. I highlighted I did not receive a response from any board members prior to 12 o'clock noon today. And I would like to acknowledge that Mr. G, who did respond shortly before 1 p.m. Thank you for at least acknowledging my email. Although I found your behavior and character controversial and unbecoming of a person running and elected to a school board, I do appreciate honesty and admission of human error. Now, to clear up any misunderstandings, I support parent choice. I do not support masking mandates. In fact, I don't support the overreach of the public school system in any fashion. I'm sure I'm gonna need to say our prayer and tell everyone to call off the hounds for this next one, but I was there to listen on the behalf of the concerned parents of York Suburban who could not attend or did not want to convey the message that they were in support of conversations like this taking place on school grounds. I'm free to breathe the God-given air, and I went to that meeting mask-free to be a fly on the wall. The reason I wrote you the questions was to point out the hypocrisy and chaos that snowballs when you continue to make rules for rules and requirements for those rules and allowances for these rules, but not for those rules. Does that sound silly? It's because it is. I wasn't even sure that you'd allow me to speak tonight because the rules are ever changing. You didn't scroll through the comments as you have in the past, nor read them aloud. And previously, you stated members of the community could not donate time during a board meeting to allow another speaker to continue beyond their 5 minutes. Rules changed, and then you allowed a person to go twice. You allowed a gentleman to speak and read his wife's comment that was submitted online and posted in this agenda. See how making more rules can lead to more confusion? And overreaching authority entices pushback. Well, here's a solution. Keep it simple, stupid. I'm sure you've heard the saying. Let parents make medical decisions for their own children. Call them if their child is injured at school immediately. Let us bear the burden of assessing if they require medical attention. I know for me, the health and safety of my very own children surely ranks no higher on your meter than it does on mine. Let parents decide if wearing a mask protects their own child or if they choose to give them experimental injections. Enforce discipline for students who invoke and participate in violence in our schools and make the expectations clear. Behavior at school is unacceptable when it includes fighting and disruption. It is nor a productive nor safe environment. And in closing, I'll add that in his response, Mr. G mentioned that he works and volunteers over 60 hours a week. I didn't know we were competing, but I also do those things, and I'm a single mother. Now can someone show me which equity box I need to check to get my questions answered? This is the second time I pulled my children from York Suburban. There will not be a third. They will return to our Catholic school after Christmas. But as a taxpayer in this district, I do not want to see this school fall apart. I do not want the value of my home to plummet because the school that was so admired across York County has now become a school where parents feel they are lied to and students feel unsafe to attend. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Courtney Hendrickson, and I live at 1585 Wyndham Drive. And I'm here tonight basically on behalf of the concerned parents of York Suburban. I did remove my school-age children from the school when we decided to go hybrid. My questions and comments tonight are as follows. Many of us, myself included, have asked you repeatedly to please discuss and provide answers during your discussion time to specific questions, and it repeatedly falls on deaf ears. Not one time have I asked you to discuss or provide an answer to my questions in person, and have you done so? So what does one need to do to get a direct and timely answer from any of you? Do you not think it's your duty to respond to the community members when they email you questions and concerns? Or is that only during a campaign that touts transparency as one of its talking points? I'm not trying to be unkind, but I honestly am asking the tough questions that need to be asked and brought to light. We all deserve better, and I believe YS as a whole is better than this. The question is, when will your actions meet the words that you say or the oath that you took to serve your community? Serving your community is not ignoring concerned parents, taxpayers, and residents of York Suburban. It's actually engaging them and taking time to answer them. And sometimes those are tough questions. Dr. Krauser, your timely responses are appreciated, and your way of communicating with me gives me hope that one day I may return my kids to the YS classroom. However, all that I've witnessed the last 2 years has shown me that homeschool is what makes the most sense just for my family. When it comes to masking, I believe it is clear, or should be clear now, since the Supreme Court ruling lifted the stayed order on Allison Beam's masking order, that all schools should clearly see that they do not have any broad authority, like was claimed by this board and its solicitor on multiple occasions and in various emails. The acting secretary's masking order was illegal, and therefore YS and others followed an illegal order. I understand people may want to encourage the board to vote for reinstating a mandatory masking order, but this is not legally sound. To be clear, if Secretary Beam was told that she overstepped and does not have the broad authority that she claimed under the Disease Control and Prevention Act, why would anyone believe that any Pennsylvania school district can claim broad authority under the public school code? Thankfully, it appears that York Suburban does now understand that any attempt to bring mandatory masking back actually opens them up to unnecessary and avoidable lawsuits. I hope people will do all they can to be informed, to be in good health, and to exercise their right to wear a mask if they choose, or 2, or 3, or 4, if they choose under the optional masking policy that is now in place. If you as a board member are tempted to entertain mandatory masking any further, I ask you, how exactly or why exactly do you believe that any school district has the power and authority to require mandatory masking when the Secretary of Health for the Commonwealth does not? Lastly, on 12/8 at the LGBTQ meeting, at the suburban meeting, there were those people without masks. At the time of the meeting on those school grounds, it was required for all. If the school solicitor was present, and she was, and a panel member, the solicitor and other staff did not open that meeting asking or requiring masks. With that being said, I think it's clear that the hypocrisy does run deep. I wish it wasn't so. If the school's own solicitor, who knows the law and these so-called legal mandates, doesn't even speak to them or enforce the policy, I suggest that any staff, and no staff was speaking to them, I think we need to stop pretending from this point on. Thankfully, it's an option now to wear a mask for those who want them. That's including staff and students. I also want to make it clear that there are medical professionals that also are saying there is even information out there that they are still harmful. There are studies out there. We can't just keep on saying that it's totally safe and we can try and keep this stuff going. I'm going to skip ahead just to finish up. We are not one size fits all, and so while some people did fine in masks and may elect to wear them forever, not everyone shares the same medical opinion that they are not without risk or harm. So please, I ask you to all think very carefully before being swayed by the understandable fears about those cases climbing, because we cannot just take away people's basic rights due to real or imagined fears. There are now shots available to people who want or need them, and there are masks available to those under the health and safety plan that allows for options. I'll finish up. I hope many will embrace the beauty of choice in this great nation of ours. Defending choice is being on the right side of history. No one is advocating that I know of at York Suburban to totally make it mandatory to breathe the God-given air and to not allow masks. People are simply supporting our freedom of choice. In closing, I will say I am reminded that to whom much is given, much is required. I pray that you all remember that when you write emails telling people to please be patient or to trust that you have a safety issue under control and it's handled, please never forget that these are the moments that help us decide if we can trust you. Whether you respond directly to questions, how you handle our most basic rights, replying to emails, regardless of whether it's campaign time or not. Many, many people are awake now, and people are watching your actions more than your words. Thank you for your time, and may God bless you and guide all your decisions. Thank you.
I just wanted to finish with a couple last thoughts. I was wasn't certainly as articulate the first go as I'd like to be. Oh, still Angel Hepner, still 1028 Hill Street. Thank you, sir. I'm generally understanding that we are saying that we follow the CDC guidelines for masking. Is that correct? We can ask questions of the president, right?
What we do is we've created a health and safety plan that leaned on CDC guidelines. We don't directly or are under no obligation to follow them directly. I believe that's accurate.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, for your future consideration, I certainly hope we would lean that way. It clearly states that if we are fully vaccinated, still to maximize protection and prevent possible spreading, especially to people who are more vulnerable than perhaps you. They recommend masks when indoors in public places. School is still indoors in public places and actually pretty crowded these days. I just would appreciate a place where my kid can go to school and be safe. He needs to be in the building to learn. I don't want him to miss out on years consecutively of education. He deserves a good education. But he also deserves to be safe. Beginning of the school year, when we talked about this, there were 11 patients in York Hospital who were COVID. The week before school, it over doubled, went to 25. Currently, we have 176. It's substantial currently in our area. So I would like us to be cautious while we decide versus be loose with it and find out it's a bad plan. Put some staff member, parent, family member, child at risk. That is really the most of what I have to say on that one, but I appreciate your thought on this. I hope that we will discuss it sooner than later. Obviously, it changes frequently. Perhaps by spring it'll be lower. It won't even be a thing, but right now it's still kind of thing, and I'm still kind of concerned, and I appreciate you guys' time very much. Have a good night.
Hi, Pino Desai, 740 Willowbrook Way. I had a question for the administration or the school board as far as last time when we had the board meeting, one of the suggestion was, can the school host a vaccine location? And from the WellSpan employee, it was noted that they reached out, but the administration declined to have a mobile vaccine clinic. Why would YS not promote something that would create opportunity for vaccine to be distributed logistically available for parents who can't? So, is there an answer for this?
We'll respond after.
Thank you.
Hi, Melanie Bear, 513 Winwood Road. I'm sorry I was unprepared to speak tonight, but I felt compelled to come up here after I saw the behavior of the board. Since none of you are allowed to answer questions, I'll ask this question of you. If you would please go back and watch the tape. You have some of your people who continue to turn around and look at the time, so maybe a suggestion would be to put a time in the back so that it's not as rude that people are turning around in the middle of people's comments and watching to make sure that the time's going down. I think that it's rude. My question to you is, how do we get somebody to respond from the board? If it's not during public comment time and you email and no one answers, how is it that we are supposed to get our questions answered?
Basically, questions that come to the board are forwarded to the administration. But I think the administration will not get into a discussion back and forth, but they will answer questions about policy, about academics, and about student health. Is that fair?
Okay, so when our question goes into the board, then we are to assume that it got forwarded to the proper administrator. I have never received a response from an administrator except for Dr. Krauser, and that's only when I am directly towards him. He is respectful. He always answers all the time. I can't say the same of any of you. We have no idea what's going on. And this isn't just coming from me. This is coming from lots and lots of people. And we're just wondering like what the process is. So we are to put in an email to the school board and the school board turns it over to the proper administrator.
If you can come straight to the administration, there's no need to send it to the school board and have us forward it.
Well, if there's problems that in the administration that we're bringing to the school board, then it gets sent back to the administration that we're having problems with.
And the school board addresses it.
But the school board isn't addressing it because we're not getting any answers. No, it's not always personnel issues. It's issues that are going on in the schools. Like for instance, the masking and the decisions of letting some people wear masks and letting people not wear masks. Why were visitors allowed to come into the basketball games and not wear masks? Where should that question go for that specific person?
Let's take that right now.
Okay.
There was a state law that said no masks. I mean masks, I'm sorry.
Masks, yes.
It is difficult. You would hope that in an adult situation, somebody wouldn't directly try to violate the rule by going to a meeting without a mask. It is difficult to have teachers act as police. Now, I believe in every one of these events, teachers will say, please wear a mask. I'm not sure about the public meeting that we talked about the other day. I haven't seen any pictures of the community meeting, but I believe there were 4 people that chose to deliberately violate the law.
Actually, there was 5, the 6th being Todd Platts.
5. Okay.
The 6th person was Todd Platts, who was a York County judge. Nobody was asked to
wear.
wear.
Had an agenda, but
I don't know what the agenda was, but the solicitor was there who had people removed.
Do you want me to respond to your question, or do you want to talk?
Go ahead.
Thank you. The school board charges the administration with following our policies. The teachers, the administrators are not police. They're going to do what's best. If I take it a step farther, I would say that also the school board does have the authority to set policy relating to the well-being of students. So the school board is within its rights to set a mask policy no matter what the courts decided in this previous case. The school board is going to do what's best for all the students. One individual student's rights doesn't necessarily trump the sickness of hundreds of kids. Now, that's not saying that that's where the board's going, but the board has that authority. That's as straightforward as I can say it.
That's been given, that's stated by the governor that
I'm not disputing that. I'm saying, why is it enforced at some meetings and not enforced at others?
Well, I think part of it is the fact that as a school district, it's easier to enforce with students. When it's in a game situation or a community forum, it gets to be a little bit trickier. And then they become the mask police, if you will. So if that didn't take place, then it didn't take place. I don't know how else to explain that. So
I can understand that in the setting of perhaps a basketball game, especially when you have outside visitors. But this seems to be the same exact setting as the meeting that took place at the middle school. It's no different. That you were in the room at both meetings. So why were people not able to continue a school board meeting and told that they have to put a mask on to continue the meeting, but at another meeting with this same forum, now we're not talking about students, it wasn't even suggested that people put one on.
I
Is that
believe-
because there was a York County judge there?
I wasn't there, but I believe it was requested.
It was not requested. Please go back and watch the tape.
I can.
So it wasn't videotaped. There's no videotaping in the middle school cafeteria. Mr. Gee responded saying that he has pictures.
It was public pictures that were posted on different Facebook pages that of the panel and of the audience.
But it wasn't, it's not like we can go back and review the
Okay, so
conversation.
but he's telling you that there was people there that.
So what we have is a complaint that adults in the committee chose to violate the law, and you're upset that administration didn't do something about that.
I am upset that the same solicitor who said that we couldn't continue a meeting not to a school board meeting because of not wearing a
The
mask.
solicitor didn't say that, I said that.
Okay, you said that and she supported it. And
But
she's
the-
at the
and that-
same meeting and is she not the person who is
No.
like the lawyer for the school?
No, she is our representative to guide us on policy and law. She's not a policeman. She's not an enforcer of school policy. Did I say that accurately enough?
Yeah, and just to be really fair relative to the situation of a school board meeting, which is hosted by 9 members and a superintendent for a public forum, the panel that I was asked to sit on was coordinated by your school social worker who was doing it as a community outreach. There was no building principal present. There wasn't a high-level administrator there. She was simply hosting a panel and she asked me to attend. I wasn't there speaking on behalf of the board or hosting a public meeting. I wasn't there to give legal advice to a board because the board wasn't present. I'm not there as an enforcement arm of the school district. I was simply there to provide my opinion on a panel. Circumstances were described relative to that meeting and masks were expected. I have no idea what level of compliance occurred at the door. I walked in the same way that everybody else did. It was an open door to the parking lot. We sat down and we began the presentation. So I think there's a distinct difference between the forum that we're hosting here and a forum hosted by a school social worker who is not an administrator and is not in charge of enforcing the morals and rules of the community.
I was under the understanding that the rules were that when something took place inside of a school building, and this is a school building and the middle school was a school building, and I'm just trying to point out the hypocrisy of you can't be the mask police. That's the point. You can't be the mask police. Thank you.
And if there's nothing else, I think we're adjourned. Thank you.